empty pink sneakers by the car wheel, and silence stretched out for 30 years. In June 1995, 6-year-old Morgan Nick was catching fireflies on a baseball field, unaware that a predator was already watching her from the darkness. This is the story of a mother who challenged time itself and of a scientific breakthrough in 2024 that finally unmasked the killer. How did one evening in a quiet Arkansas town change America forever? And where had the truth been hiding all this time? Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. For the residents of the small town of Alma, nestled among the vast fields of Arkansas, the evening of June 9, 1995, felt like the perfect embodiment of a southern summer. The air at that time of year was always special there, heavy, humid, saturated with the thick scent of freshly cut grass and sun-baked earth. In places like this, life moved at a leisurely pace, governed not by the rhythm of big cities, but by the changing seasons and the schedule of local sports games. Alma was the kind of settlement where everyone knew their neighbor by name, and the concept of danger was limited to unusual weather or a broken piece of farm equipment. Doors were rarely locked, and children were allowed to roam freely without a hint of fear, under the belief that the whole town was one big, safe family. That evening, the center of gravity for the entire community was the Little League baseball stadium. For Alma, this was more than just a sporting event. It was a social ritual, a moment of unity. The stands were packed. Parents, teachers, local farmers, and shopkeepers all gathered to cheer for their children. Under the tall floodlight poles slicing through the twilight, the familiar hum filled the air. Shouts of fans, the crack of bat-meeting ball, the sound of popcorn machines. Among the bustle stood 6-year-old Morgan Nick. She was impossible to miss. A mop of light curly hair constantly in motion, and that carefree child's smile revealing silver crowns on her teeth. Morgan was the embodiment of what would later be called a sunshine child. Energetic, curious, always striving to be at the center of everything. She wore a simple green t-shirt and shorts, and on her feet were those same pink sneakers that would later become the most recognizable and tragic symbol of the case. Around 10:30 p.m., as the game neared its end, Morgan approached her mother, Colleen Nick. She was bored sitting still while the adults discussed the score and asked if she could go with friends to the edge of the parking lot to catch fireflies. Colleen paused for a moment, looking out at the field. A mother's instinct is a subtle thing, but at that moment, nothing in Alma foreshadowed trouble. Right in front of her were hundreds of familiar faces. The stadium was brightly lit, and the parking lot was only a few dozen steps away. Colleen gave permission, firmly instructing her daughter not to go far and to stay within sight. Morgan and 2 friends, Ty and another girl, ran toward the border between light and shadow. Colleen glanced their way from time to time, watching the small figures dart between parked cars, laughing and trying to scoop the glowing lights from the grass with their hands. It was a scene of pure idyll, a moment meant to remain in memory as a warm childhood memory. But at exactly 10:45 p.m., that idyll shattered. The game ended, and the crowd of spectators poured toward their vehicles. Ty and his friend returned to their parents, but when Colleen looked again, Morgan was not among them. When she asked where her daughter was, the children answered casually. Morgan had stayed by her mother's car to shake sand out of her sneakers. Colleen walked quickly toward her old Nissan. She expected to see her daughter squatting by the wheel or to hear her voice, but the parking lot greeted her with deafening silence. There, on the asphalt beside the car, stood the pink children's sneakers, placed so neatly it looked as though Morgan had simply vanished out of them in an instant. Colleen's scream tore through the quiet night stadium, ending the old Alma forever. In that moment, the mother did not yet know that the engine of a red truck was already starting and pulling out of the parking lot. She did not know that the search beginning at that second would stretch across 30 years. For her, time stopped right there, by the car wheel, next to the empty pink sneakers of her sunshine child. Her loved ones called her a sunshine child, and it was not just a pretty phrase. Morgan possessed a rare childhood energy capable of bringing any space to life. Her appearance was classic for a little Arkansas girl, a mop of sun-bleached blonde hair and piercing blue eyes always full of lively curiosity. But one detail later became the most bitter identifier for investigators: 5 silver crowns on her baby teeth. In June 1995, they were merely part of her childish smile. Years later, those crowns would be searched for in photographs and descriptions across the country, hoping for a miracle. Morgan's life was steeped in what the family called her pink world. She adored the color in every form, from dresses and bows to her pink toothbrush. Even her participation in the Girl Scouts was, for her, not just a game, but a sincere way to make the world a little better and kinder. She embodied absolute purity and that boundless trust in others that adults irreversibly lose with age. At the center of this small universe was her mother, Colleen Nick. As a single mother, she created a world for her children built on unbreakable emotional connection and love. Their home in the Ozarks had no luxury, but it held something far more valuable: complete, unconditional safety. Morgan was the child who could not fall asleep without long evening talks with Mom about everything that happened during the day. Every morning began with hugs. Every evening ended with the promise of a new game. There was also one silent witness to Morgan's happy childhood: a cat named Emily. That fateful evening, Emily, as usual, waited on the doorstep for her little owner. She would keep waiting for another 19 years. That cat became a living symbol of time forever frozen inside their home. Emily grew old and died in rooms where toys, clothes, and pink trinkets remained untouched for decades, waiting for the return of an owner who had only stepped away for a few minutes. In the mid-1990s, Alma seemed like a place where evil simply could not exist. Parents raised children together, and the baseball stadium during a game felt safer than one's own living room. Morgan's disappearance became a collective loss of innocence for the entire state of Arkansas. Before that night, the abduction of a child by a stranger seemed like something from distant news reports or thriller movies. When a girl known to nearly every family in town vanished, the air in Alma changed. Neighbors began looking at each other with suspicion, and parents started anxiously clutching their children's hands even on ordinary park walks. Morgan left behind a vacuum that could not be filled. She had been the sun around which the Nick family revolved, and when that sun went out, Colleen was plunged into total darkness. It was in that darkness that the steel resolve of a mother who refused to accept the role of victim began to form. Colleen decided that if her daughter could not come home on her own, she would turn the whole world upside down to find her. But in those first hours, she still believed it was only a terrible mistake, and that Morgan would soon emerge from the shadows of the trees with hands full of fireflies. 10:30 p.m. The Alma Stadium was gradually sinking into the usual post-game bustle. The final whistle had already sounded and organized movement began in the stands, people folding chairs, exchanging impressions of the game, and slowly heading toward the exits. At that moment, Morgan, together with her friends, 8-year-old Ty and another girl, was only a few dozen meters from the bleachers at the edge of the illuminated parking lot. In the children's minds, this space was simply an extension of the stadium, equally safe and filled with familiar adults. Later, during numerous interviews, the children would tell detectives details that forced the investigation to look at the events of that evening in a new light. While they were running through tall grass trying to catch the last fireflies, a man was intently watching them. He stood beside a red Ford truck with a white camper shell, parked in the farthest and darkest corner of the lot, where the stadium floodlights barely reached the ground. To the children, he was just a strange man, another adult in the crowd whom they paid little attention to, absorbed in their game. 10:45 p.m. became the point of no return. Morgan's friends decided it was time to go back to their parents and headed toward the bleachers. But 6-year-old Morgan lingered. Sand and small debris had gotten into her sneakers while running through grass and dirt, so she squatted beside the wheel of her mother's parked Nissan to clean them out. She took off her pink sneakers and carefully placed them on the asphalt, concentrating on this simple child's task. At that moment, she was completely alone, separated from the crowd by rows of cars. Colleen Nick, meanwhile, was saying goodbye to friends just a couple dozen steps from where her daughter was. She was distracted for literally 15 or 20 seconds, confident that Morgan was still with her friends. When Colleen looked back toward the parking lot, Ty and the other girl were already approaching her, but the small figure in the green t-shirt was nowhere to be seen. When the mother asked where Morgan was, Ty simply pointed toward the car, explaining that she had stayed there to shake out the sand. Colleen walked briskly to the vehicle, expecting to see her daughter hiding behind the door or squatting down. But the parking lot met her with ringing emptiness. Next to the Nissan's wheel, exactly where the friends had last seen her, stood the pink sneakers. They were set down as if their owner was about to slip them back on in a second, but something or someone had interrupted that action. In those first moments, panic had not yet fully taken hold of Colleen. She began calling Morgan's name, quietly at first, thinking it was a game, but with each passing second, her voice grew higher and more frantic. Soon, her scream, raw with primal fear, drowned out the noise of departing cars and froze everyone at the stadium. Word of the missing child spread instantly. Dozens of people who had been about to go home dropped everything and began searching the area. Police arrived within minutes of the 911 call. Officers immediately gave the case top priority, especially after witnesses mentioned the red truck with the white camper that had sped out of the parking lot at high speed precisely in the moments Colleen discovered the empty shoes. By midnight, the stadium grounds resembled a war zone. K-9 units had arrived, helicopters with thermal imaging circled overhead, and hundreds of volunteers formed human chains, combing every inch of the surrounding woods. Colleen Nick stood at the center of this surreal nightmare, still clutching Morgan's pink sneakers. She was in deep shock, staring into the darkness, hoping to see her daughter's bright head appear. But the stadium floodlights gradually went out, giving way to a cold dawn, and Morgan never came back. By morning, Alma woke up in a new reality, a reality in which safe places no longer existed and something truly sinister had been hiding behind the facade of a quiet American town. Investigators quickly understood the scale of the task, which over time turned into a true technical nightmare. In the mid-1990s, in agricultural states like Arkansas, a red pickup was the most common work vehicle. Thousands of nearly identical trucks traveled the roads. Police launched an unprecedented inspection, eventually checking more than 10,000 trucks nationwide. Officers literally lived in garages and parking lots, measuring gaps between cabs and campers, checking VINs, and interviewing every owner within hundreds of miles. Yet the perpetrator seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to vanish into road dust without leaving a drop of biological material or a single clear fingerprint. Years passed, and the Morgan Nick investigation became an endless series of false hopes and crushing disappointments. One of the most painful moments came in 2002 when police received what they called an extremely specific tip. The information was so detailed that the investigative team had almost no doubts. The burial site had been found. It concerned a remote plot of land in Boonville. For several days, under the gaze of dozens of television cameras, heavy equipment tore open layers of earth, turning an abandoned lot into deep trenches. Colleen Nick stood behind the yellow police tape the entire time, never taking her eyes off the excavator buckets. She waited. Not necessarily for a miracle, but at least for truth. The result of days of digging was only piles of trash and barren soil. That episode left another deep scar on the family's heart, but did not make them give up. Later, the focus shifted to Spiro, Oklahoma. In 2010 and again in 2017, detectives returned to abandoned farms in that area following new witness statements and ground-penetrating radar results. Each time, the scenario repeated with chilling precision: urgent news, excitement among volunteers, and complete silence in the end. But perhaps the cruelest trials for Colleen were the appearances of so-called imposters, people who for various reasons tried to pass themselves off as an adult Morgan. The case of Tanya Smith in 2012 caused a particularly strong resonance. The woman contacted Colleen claiming to be her missing daughter. The resemblance in photographs was striking, and some details of the woman's biography eerily matched the circumstances of the case. Social media and newspapers were already celebrating a miraculous reunion between mother and daughter. Colleen had to go through personal hell waiting for DNA results. torn between insane hope and fear of yet another deception. When the lab ruled out biological relation, it was another world-shattering blow. During these long years when the investigation repeatedly hit dead ends, Colleen found support in her friendship with Patty Wetterling, the mother of another abducted boy, Jacob Wetterling. Patty was the only person who understood Colleen without needing many words. Colleen often asked her how to keep breathing every morning, knowing your child was still out there somewhere in the dark. That solidarity in grief became a lifeline for Morgan's mother. While detectives continued shuffling dusty files, Colleen kept fighting, refusing to let Morgan's case be archived among forgotten stories. She knew the killer was still out there somewhere and believed that time would eventually force him to make a mistake. In the mid-1990s, Morgan Nick's face stopped belonging only to her family. It became the property of the entire nation. After the first weeks of searching yielded no results, Colleen Nick realized that silence was the main enemy. She initiated one of the largest awareness campaigns in the history of missing persons operations. Morgan's image, that little girl with the radiant smile, appeared on millions of milk cartons, billboards, and flyers distributed across the country. This was a continuation of the 1980s tradition when portraits of missing children were printed on milk cartons. For Colleen, it became a heavy psychological ordeal. Every time she went to the store or opened the mailbox, she saw her own daughter turned into a national symbol of tragedy. Morgan became the face of all missing children in Arkansas, which later helped create foundations and alert systems. But for the family, it meant living under the constant gaze of millions of strangers who sympathized but could not help. When conventional investigative methods reached a dead end, the best analysts from Quantico were brought in. FBI profilers studied the circumstances of the abduction at the stadium and created a psychological profile of the suspect that was, in many ways, ahead of its time. They concluded that the abductor was not a random passerby. This was a person who felt completely at home in Alma. Experts described him as a gray man, someone who knows how to be absolutely invisible in a crowd, arousing no suspicion. He possessed enormous patience. He had likely attended similar games more than once, selecting a victim and studying blind spots of cameras and patrols. His choice of Morgan was not random. He was looking for a child who would be left momentarily without direct supervision. The analysts emphasized the perpetrator's cold-bloodedness. To carry out an abduction in front of hundreds of people in just 15 seconds required someone who had pre-calculated every escape route. This profile would later match Billy Jack Link's perfectly, but in the 1990s the investigation lacked only one thing: physical evidence tying the theory to a specific person. The first serious crack in his disguise appeared just 2 months after Morgan's disappearance, in August 1995. In Van Buren, Lynx attempted to abduct an 8-year-old girl, using an eerily similar scenario. He chose a moment when the child was momentarily out of adult supervision and tried to force her into his vehicle. This time, luck was not on the predator's side. The girl's family was nearby, heard the screams, and fought back fiercely. Lynx was arrested on the spot, and for the first time, police had the opportunity to closely examine both him and his vehicle. Parked in Van Buren was the very vehicle the entire state had been searching for, a bright red Ford pickup with a white camper shell. During a detailed inspection, detectives found the exact features the children from the Alma Stadium had described: a barely noticeable gap between the cab and the camper, and a damaged rear light. It was an incredible match that instantly made Lynx the prime suspect in the Morgan Nick case. Investigators from Alma rushed to interrogate him, hoping the 30-day nightmare for the Nick family was about to end with a confession. But during the 1995 interrogations, Lynx displayed icy calm and astonishing composure. He admitted to the Van Buren abduction attempt, claiming it was a sudden impulse, but categorically denied any involvement in Morgan's disappearance. Detectives spent hours trying to catch him in contradictions, pressing on his past and appealing to his conscience, but Lynx remained impenetrable. In the mid-1990s, DNA analysis technology was not yet capable of working with microscopic or degraded samples, and no direct evidence linking him to the Alma Stadium parking lot was found at that time. Searches of his home and truck yielded no immediate results. Lynx had been careful enough not to leave obvious traces from the first crime. In the end, justice was served only halfway. Billy Jack Lynx was sentenced to a long prison term for the Van Buren incident, but he was never formally charged in the Morgan Nick case. To the investigation, he remained only a person of interest, and to Colleen Nick, the man she was inwardly convinced held the key to her daughter's fate. Years passed. Lynx aged in his cell but never showed any desire to ease his conscience. He kept silent even as his health rapidly deteriorated. Billy Jack Lynx died in prison in September 2000 at the age of 72. News of his death was a devastating blow to the Nick family. The man who had been the only living link to that night at the stadium was gone, leaving behind no note, no confession, no indication of where to look for Morgan. It seemed the mystery of the Sunshine Child's disappearance had been buried forever with him under an unmarked gravestone. But Lynx failed to account for one thing. He left behind the red truck, which sat rotting in an impound lot, and decades later, that vehicle would speak in the language of modern science that a criminal from the past could never have imagined. As investigators delved deeper into Billy Jack Lynx's biography, a terrifying question arose before them. Could a man first decide to commit such a bold child abduction at the age of 67? Professional profilers and experienced FBI investigators unanimously leaned toward the view that the events in Alma and Van Buren were not the beginning, but rather the final act of a long and dark career of a predator. In criminology, there is a firmly held belief that such offenders do not appear out of nowhere in old age. Their deviant behavior usually develops over decades, passing through stages of fantasy and minor offenses before reaching open hunting. Analysts pointed to the frightening confidence with which Lynx acted at the baseball field. He chose the most crowded location possible, calculated the perfect moment when the mother's attention was briefly diverted, and vanished without a trace in just 15 seconds. Such precision and composure are usually the result of years of experience and honed observation skills. Experts began re-examining archives of unsolved cases in Arkansas and neighboring Oklahoma from the 1950s through the 1990s. Lynx had spent almost his entire life in this region, except for his military service during World War II, giving him perfect knowledge of the terrain and decades to remain undetected. Many investigators are convinced that Billy Jack Lynx was a classic serial predator who for decades exploited the image of the quiet neighbor. His inconspicuousness was his main armor. Police checked possible connections between Lynx and other child disappearances that had remained cold cases for decades. Particular attention was paid to cases involving similar vehicle descriptions or the same modus operandi, sudden disappearance of a child from a safe public place. There was suspicion that Lynx may have been involved in at least several more episodes that were at the time attributed to accidents or runaways. The problem was that in the mid-20th century, information sharing between counties was extremely inefficient, and methods for collecting biological evidence were practically non-existent. Lynx, as a veteran and apparently law-abiding citizen, never came to police attention until August 1995. This allowed him to build an impeccable alibi spanning an entire lifetime. Detectives working on the Morgan Nick case repeatedly stated that finding her DNA in Lynx's truck was only the tip of the iceberg. They suspected his dark archive might contain the names of other children whose fates remain unknown. Lynx's death in prison effectively closed the possibility of face-to-face confrontations or obtaining confessions regarding other cases. Yet for many experts in serial murder, his figure remains an example of a successful predator who managed to conceal his true nature behind a mask of ordinariness for nearly 70 years. The thought that Morgan Nick may have been only one of many victims on Billy Jack Lynx's long list remains one of the darkest and most discussed theories in Arkansas crime circles. For nearly 3 decades, the old red truck of Billy Jack Lynx remained a silent monument to the tragedy. It sat in the impound lot, gradually succumbing to the relentless passage of time, metal covered in layers of rust, paint fading under the blazing Arkansas sun, the interior filled with dust and the smell of decay. In forensic science, such objects are often written off, considered irretrievably ruined by decades of environmental exposure. But the investigators working on the Morgan Nick case showed rare persistence. They refused to allow the vehicle to be scrapped, intuitively sensing that this truck still had something to say. The technological breakthrough the Nick family had waited 29 years for came from a field that in the mid-1990s seemed pure science fiction. The Othram Laboratory, specializing in the most complex and hopeless cold cases, was brought in. Specialists at this organization work at the intersection of modern genetics and digital technology, using a method known as forensic genetic genealogy. Unlike standard police DNA tests that require a high-quality sample with a hair root or a large amount of biological material, Othram experts learned to extract information from microscopic and heavily degraded fragments. The key to the solution was a single hair found in Link's truck during the original search. In 1995, it was practically useless to investigators because it did not contain enough nuclear DNA for analysis. But in 2024, scientists applied full genome sequencing. This allowed them to literally reconstruct, piece by piece, the genetic profile of the person to whom the hair belonged, despite decades spent in the unfavorable conditions of an impound lot. On October 1, 2024, the silence that had enveloped the Morgan Nick case was finally broken. At an emergency press conference watched live across the state, police and FBI representatives officially announced the results of the analysis. The genetic profile extracted from the hair in Billy Jack Link's truck was a complete match with Morgan Nick's DNA. This was not a statistical probability or an assumption. Science gave an unequivocal answer. After 29 years, the investigation finally had direct physical proof that little Morgan had been inside Link's red truck on the night of her disappearance. For Colleen Nick, this news became a moment of devastating truth. For 30 years, she had kept a tiny spark of hope in her heart that her daughter was alive and would one day knock on the door. The official laboratory report effectively extinguished that flame, confirming that the Sunshine Child met her end at the hands of a predator. Colleen later described the feeling as reliving that night at the stadium all over again. But now the pain had a name and a face. Science accomplished what thousands of volunteers and hundreds of detectives could not. It irrevocably linked victim and perpetrator with an unbreakable thread of DNA. This breakthrough changed Billy Jack Link's status. From a person of interest, he officially became Morgan Nick's abductor. Even though the perpetrator had been dead for more than 20 years, this scientific confirmation carried colossal significance for justice and for the entire child safety system in the United States. It proved that time is no longer absolute protection for criminals. Genetic memory proved stronger than rust and oblivion. Now that the main mystery had been solved, police faced one final and most difficult task: determining exactly where Lynx had left the girl's body. Detectives renewed their efforts to study the movements of the red truck in June 1995, hoping that modern soil analysis and ground-penetrating radar would help them close the case and bring Morgan home for a proper burial. After the 2024 breakthrough, the search for Morgan Nick transformed from simple terrain sweeps into a high-tech operation. Where in 1995 hundreds of volunteers moved blindly, today the investigation uses tools capable of seeing through decades. The main weapon became ground-penetrating radar, GPR. The device sends pulses into the soil, detecting density anomalies. Even after 30 years, the Earth remembers interference. Ground disturbed long ago leaves a permanent shadow on monitors, pointing detectives to places where the natural soil structure was altered by human hands. Using LiDAR and archived satellite imagery, experts reconstructed the Arkansas landscape exactly as it appeared on the night of the abduction. This allowed them to filter out modern terrain changes and pinpoint the red truck's likely routes, narrowing the search zone to specific, previously inaccessible forest areas. Forensic botanists were brought in. Infrared cameras detect microscopic changes in leaf color and tree growth cycles. Nature inadvertently reveals locations where soil was enriched with organic remains. They are complemented by next-generation cadaver dogs whose noses can detect scent even through layers of concrete after 3 decades. Today's search is a battle of science against forgetting. Police are methodically digitizing every meter of land connected to the killer, turning the investigation into precise mathematical calculation. The goal remains the same: to force the Arkansas Earth to return what does not belong to it and finally bring Morgan home. 30 years is an entire lifetime frozen within the walls of Colleen Nick's home. While the world around Alma changed rapidly, Morgan's pink world remained untouched. Her toys and clothes waited for decades for their owner's return. But the tragedy at the baseball field did not remain merely private grief. It was reborn into a massive mission that changed the child safety system across the entire country. Colleen Nick turned her pain into steeled determination. The foundation she established became a support for hundreds of families, and her persistence led to the creation of the Morgan Nick Amber Alert system. Today, Morgan's name is a digital shield that saves thousands of children, giving them the chance that was denied to her in June 1995. For the family, the 2024 breakthrough brought bitter certainty. Genetic testing finally tore the mask from Billy Jack Link's, proving that the Sunshine Child met her end in his red truck. And though this news extinguished the last spark of hope for a miracle, it opened the path to the final goal: finding the place of rest so Morgan could at last come home. Morgan Nick ceased to be just a name in an archived file. She became a symbol of maternal love that proved stronger than time and oblivion. In the twilight of the Alma Stadium, her presence can still be felt, reminding us that even the deepest darkness is powerless against memory. Morgan forever remained 6 years old, frozen in her last dance with fireflies, but her light continues to live in every rescued child and in every alert signal that will never again allow the truth to disappear.
On September 27, 2024, Ortham Laboratory sent a report to Detective Taylor that the hair contained in the evidence was that of Colleen Nick, one of her siblings, or one of her children. The bottom line in this is that the physical evidence collected from the truck strongly indicates that Morgan had been in this truck. Did Links have help in abducting Morgan or concealing his crime all these years? And where is Morgan now? I can tell you today that this investigation is not over.
You know, there have been an army of supporters and advocates and heroes who have rallied to uncover the truth about Morgan's disappearance, and you see those people here in this room today. And what I have to say about Billy Jack Links is that he stole Morgan from me. He stole her from her dad. And he stole her from Logan and Taryn. But he didn't see that he could never win. Because our love for Morgan, her memory and her voice outlasted his life. And that love continues to shine. Her heart, Morgan's heart, shines on.
If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.